Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of G-Rated, where we review the latest movies and TV shows. Today, I am joined by Mac. I'm your host, Gerald Bourguet, and we are talking about Netflix's original series, Shadow and Bone. Mac, we are the only two Shadow and Bone people in the office, apparently.
I'm kind of bummed. I'm glad to be making my G-Rated debut,
Yes,
of course.
that's right.
But it's surprising me that no one else in the office is a fantasy nerd.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of sad because apparently this is a very popular fantasy series of books that the show is based on.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact, we talked about this off there, but season 1, we were both very big fans of, and it was very faithful to the source material, apparently. Season 2, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I loved season 1. I was the biggest fan of season 1. I actually read the books because of how much I loved season 1. Yeah, so I did a little bit of reverse order. I watched season 1 first, absolutely fell in love with it, and then read all of the books.
Okay.
So I was super looking forward to season 2 just because of how much I loved season 1. The books were amazing, and I was a little disappointed, to say the least.
It was interesting. So I also enjoyed season 1. I wasn't crazy about it, but I was also considering reading the books because there's so many interesting things. So for those who are unfamiliar, it's a show about she's called the Sun Summoner, and she can harness the power of the sun, basically. And you have all these different Grisha, which are kind of like elementalists or like Avatar airbenders type of people that can like harness the elements. And then there's also a separate group of people called the Crows, who are kind of like not con artists, but they're
like thieves.
Thieves, assassins, heist people, and they all kind of come together. And this season, it felt like it was trying to jumble too much. But before we get into our criticisms, because I know you and I have a lot, what about this season did you like?
I liked. What did
notes.
I like? What did I like? I mean, I appreciate the attempt that they made at world building. I don't necessarily think it was as in-depth as I would have liked. I think it was too much to fit into such a short span of episodes.
It's only 8.
Yeah. But I do appreciate their attempt at world building. And I did like a lot of like the costuming. I thought was really cool. I'm trying not to be downer. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to think of things that I liked. It wasn't what I was expecting. And it diverged so much from the books that it was something that I really wasn't expecting. And so I think if I try to take off my lens of having read the books and just look at it for what it was, I think it was an okay like fantasy series. Yeah. But my expectation for like high fantasy is higher just because I've seen, high fantasy TV shows done so well. And I just feel like this one fell short of a lot of like what I expect from a high fantasy series.
It did, and because over the last couple of years we've had Game of Thrones, House of Dragon, Wheel of Time. Even I felt like
Wheel of Time was awesome.
A lot better. And I'm someone who hasn't read Shadow and Bone books or Wheel of Time books, and I just felt like Wheel of Time kind of executed what it wanted to do better.
Yes.
And that's what was concerning for me, was because even as someone who hasn't read the books, you could tell the attention to detail and world building in season 1 was just on a whole different level compared to season 2. It felt like there was so much going on and so much being thrown at you as a viewer that it was like, okay,
it's hard to follow.
It was. There was a lot going on in 8 one-hour episodes. But the things I did like, and I'm sure that these are ideas plucked straight from the books, but I like the idea of making Mal kind of the third amplifier that the main character needs to kind of amplify her powers and get to this stage where she can tear down this dark, evil realm called the Fold. And Bagra, who is the mother of the bad guy Ben Barnes. This is like tried and true. This is a Ben Barnes show. Like I feel like he's the main draw to get people to come in, and he does a great job as the villain. You can tell he has fun with it. But his mother, her kind of background story, I did kind of enjoy diving into that, and the whole scene with his mom and the bad guy where she dies at the end. Like I thought that was well done.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. They did stay true to the books by making Mal the third amplifier. So I did appreciate that. They did diverge because the ending of the series is definitely different from the books. When in the books, when the Sun Summoner kills Mal, she loses all of her powers. And her sun summoning abilities gets distributed to other Grisha. And so it's actually a bunch of other Grisha who inherit her powers that tear down the fold. She herself doesn't tear it down.
Interesting.
But she does kill the Darkling in the books. So it was a little bit different, but I do appreciate that they kept Mal as the other amplifier, because a huge theme throughout the books was the theme of sacrifice and like what you have to sacrifice in order to get what you want. And so I do appreciate that they stayed true to that, because I think the theme of sacrifice was in other plot lines as well, like Bagra having to die in order for her to help Alina. And I do love that they kept Bagra's backstory as well. It wasn't as in depth as it was in the books. Like there were chapters after chapters of how like we got to this place, and there was also flashbacks too in the books of like a perspective of seeing what happens from Bagra's eyesight. But I do like that they kept those because those were essential to the books.
Yeah, that dynamic was pretty cool, and both of the actors involved in that scene were really. They did a nice job with that, because they do have a very complicated father or mother-son relationship there. I also liked so here's my thing, like I'm gonna come right out and say it. The crows in the show do not interest me as much. Their storyline is not interesting to me. And like I like Jesper, but his attempts at being like the comedic relief kind of fall short for me in the show. But I did like when they were all like poisoned and having their hallucinations, his scene with his mom about embracing the fact that he is not a Grisha, Durest. I thought that was really well done too.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe you might have felt disconnected from them because that entire storyline and plot line was made up. That never happened in the books. Yeah.
Oh, great.
So it never happened in the books. So I think they tried to find a way to still weave the storylines together, because in the books, the only time you ever meet the crows is in the first one when they're trying to capture Alina and bring her back to get that bounty that was put on her. But it was like a very small subplot in the books that really didn't have a lot of substance to it. And I'm also like 90% sure you don't ever like, it's not like you don't see the story happening from the crow's eyes. You just hear it being told from like Alina's perspective when she meets them. And then in the second and third books for Shadow and Bone, you never hear of the crows again. So they go away after the first book, and then the crows get their own duology in two separate books like after. And the plot line in the Six of Crows has nothing to do with what you saw in this TV series. They just completely made that up. Tried to incorporate them somehow into this series, and I think that's what they came up with. So I wasn't a fan of it just because it never happened in the books. So it felt forced, and it felt like they were trying to do too much.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I was, as someone who has no idea about the background as far as the books versus the shows, like it felt disjointed just watching them try to weave those things together in the first place.
That's probably why.
and no offense to the guy who plays the lead crow, but like all he does in the show is scowl.
Yeah, he's
and like
not happy.
Be hurt and like the whole time. And like there are ways you can do that in television when you have an anti-hero like Thomas Shelby in Peaky Blinders or something like that. But I don't get the crows, their purpose at this point in time. But you said in the books, like the duology for the crows is actually, you like that more.
Yeah, the duology for the crows is more popular than the 3-book series of Shadow and Bone.
Really? Interesting.
And I think it's also because they came after the 3 books in Shadow and Bone. And so Leigh Bardugo, who wrote it, was a little bit older, so her writing style was a little bit more developed. And Six of Crows is actually amongst the fan base more popular than Shadow and Bone.
Interesting.
But the plot of the Six of Crows follows what happened at the end of the Shadow and Bone TV series when they're talking about that drug that the Fjordans were using to like make Grisha amplifiers. So that part was true to the Six of Crows books, but that was in the very first Six of Crow books, and the entire plot of Six of Crows follows that plot line of trying to mitigate the effects of the drug and stop its distribution.
Interesting. Yeah. That's interesting, because I just feel like they've tried to build up the crows as like a plot line that's just as worthy as what's going on with Alina and the Darkling and all this stuff. But I feel like every time it veers over here, I'm like interested. And every time it goes over here, I'm just like, what are we doing?
Well, I have no idea what they're going to do in season 3, if there is season 3, which actually I wanted to bring up is why I felt like they made the decision to basically take the second book and the third book and just like mash them and put them into the second season. I mean, they basically took the plot lines or minor plot lines from 4 different books into one series.
Wow.
Is because Netflix has a history of canceling seasons after the second season.
That's true.
So I think that they wanted to get to the end of where the Darkling dies, because when the Darkling dies, that's the end of Shadow and Bone, the 3 books. So I feel like they wanted to at least get to that point. So if it's canceled after this season, they've at least accomplished like the main plot line of the Darkling story. But in the end of the 3rd book for Shadow and Bone, Alina loses her powers.
Okay.
And her and Mal get married, and they just live at the orphanage where they both grew up and take care of children. And they just kind of have a happy ending. And Alina loses her mortality as well because she lost, or her immortality, because she lost her power. So her and Mal just grow old together at the orphanage and fade to black.
See, that seems nice, and it seems like you could have just done season 2 separate with book 2 and season 3 with book 3 and ended that way, instead of now we're left with this kind of cliffhanger of, oh, they have this drug that can amplify Grisha powers, and now Alina's probably going to have to address that while Mal is off in the wind being a pirate or privateer.
Privateer, not a pirate.
Not a pirate, privateer, that's right. And I'm just kind of like, okay, if they rush... Well, I don't even know if they have enough material to rush now, because you're saying that the storylines
I have no idea what they're going to do with Alina, because whatever they come up with for Alina's storyline is going to be brand new and not true to the books. So I have no idea what they're going to be doing in the next season with Alina, but it's not going to be from the books.
That's a little concerning.
I know.
Considering the way this season went with the unscripted stuff. But yeah, and it's interesting too, because I do think one of the things, and it's weird to say, but I think like just every character in this show, there's just like a general horniness to the show, right? Like the main kid, there's the love triangle going on, and then there's the thing with the Crow and Inej, and there's like all in the books. Is everyone like literally everyone coupled off like this, or is that just a
lot of the like side storylines that they came up with were just they came up with them like the sharpshooter, Jesper, he's not in a relationship in the books. Okay. The 2 siblings from Shuhan, they're not in the books. The David and Jenya, that storyline is true. They did fall in love. But David doesn't die in the books as he does in the TV series. So I'm not sure why they killed David off.
That's okay. I have problems with that whole tandem pairing.
No clue how that happened. And then the 2 wind Grisha that help sail the boats. I'm blanking on their names. They're also siblings. They're not a big storyline either. So a lot of like the love interest storylines were just also made up by the show.
So the show is like really taking heat on this one. Last thing I liked, I again, the world building here, stuff like the Sun Summoner, the Fold, those are really cool concepts and ideas. But again, I feel like that just traces back to the book. So let's talk about our complaints and concerns, because I feel like we've been alluding to this for a while. We might as well just dive in. The season felt rushed. There were too many storylines, too many condensed plots, too much going on. I was going to say it before you even volunteered this when we talked about it the other day. The Sea-Whip stuff felt so rushed. Yeah. Like one headshot and it was dead.
That was one of the most disappointing things about it, is because each of the 3 books are based off of one of them finding one of the amplifiers. So Shadow and Bone is the Stag, Siege and Storm is the Sea-Whip, and then Ruin and Rising is the Firebird. And in Siege and Storm, they're obviously trying to figure out where the Sea-Whip is, and it takes like 75% of the book for them to figure out where the Sea-Whip is. And when they do find the Sea-Whip, it's like massive. It's like a sea dragon. Like it is huge. And there also is an epic battle scene. So the Darkling and Alina find the Sea-Whip at the same time. And there's like this huge battle scene of like basically like a naval battle between ships. And then the killing of the Sea-Whip is very dramatic. And it just felt like
it was literally
it was so
there.
anticlimactic. She killed it so fast, and it was like this big. I was like, what is this?
It was more like a sea lizard. Like it wasn't even like a sea. I was so disappointed with that.
It was a sea lizard.
They weren't, maybe I was building it up in my head, because when you're in a fantasy series, you hear Sea-Whip and you're like, oh, that's going to be like a badass fucking dragon, kraken type thing. And it's just like this little serpent lizard that gets headshotted and was out.
I was so disappointed. And also another liberty that they took is the Sun Summoner does have to kill the amplifiers to get their power, but she doesn't like they don't get like melded into her like skin. They make like jewelry and like adornments out of like a piece of them. Like the scales, I think they made a bracelet out of for Alina to wear.
Okay.
So I thought that was kind of weird too, how they were like shoving the scales underneath her skin so she could absorb the power.
One of my least favorite things of season 1 was when they put like the horns like in her neckline. I was like, I don't like that.
Yeah, it freaked me out.
Again, though, I do think like the world building was not as good this season either. It felt like it was jumping from spot to spot on the map, and they tried to make it more viewer friendly by like showing the map where they're going. Yeah. But I'm just like, where the hell are we?
Honestly, confused me more because like they didn't give us like a huge picture of the map. They just had like close-ups of like what city they were in. But I totally agree. Like the world building was just not the same as it was in the books. Like they spent, I want to say, the first half of the second book in that like southern place that they were in when the TV show started. Right. In the second season, I keep blanking on the name. But it was like a warm climate, like an island type of vibe, and they were there in the book for like half of it, and they spent maybe 24 hours there in the TV show, like maybe. And so, you know, you really got to fall in love with the places that they were in because like they did such a good job of world building the books of like the culture, the language, the people, like you really felt like you were there. And in the books, they're just dragging you all over Timbuktu and you like have no time to digest like where they are. And like, it was too much. They were just trying to do too much and it just was not like executed well, I don't think.
I think whiplash is the best term for it because one second you're with the Crows in this like Peaky Blinders style face off with Pekka Rollins and like kind of like that era of Britain, and then you're in like ancient China. They're looking for this sort of sword. Like I couldn't figure out the aesthetic, and it makes sense because like in our real life world, there are so many different global and cultural eras and art styles and clothing styles, but I was trying to like keep up with the costume design. I was like, where the hell are we now?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like in the books, you never see Shuhan. Like they never go to Shuhan. Okay. So you never get that perspective. There's also this like theme of like being abandoned by the saints in the book. And they're like I know that they meant a saint when they were in Shuhan to get the sword from. Right. But one of the big themes in the books is like all the saints are dead or not alive. So people feel like abandoned by them. And there's like this revolt against saints, which is why like Alina has to battle so much in the books, is because she also has to overcome the negative stereotype that has been created around saints because the people feel abandoned by them. So there wasn't, you know, another saint that you met in the books. Like it's just very, very different. But yeah, none of the it's just a lot. There's a lot that is different between the series and the book, but.
Yeah. And the other thing that bothered me was kind of the relationship building. Like it felt, okay, it's one thing if a show is going to couple off a lot of characters and give, you know, fans their favorite coupling or whatever. But like the Jenya and David relationship had zero chemistry, like zero time devoted to it at all. Like, is it that flat in the books?
No, it's not. And it's actually a really great subplot because David originally was in the service of the Darkling, and through his relationship with Jenya, he comes to like the light side. Okay. And turns to help Alina in this epic battle that happens at the Little Palace, which we didn't get to see this season, or we probably won't ever now that where the Darkling's dead. But yeah, it was a really, really nice subplot in the books that I really did enjoy because it shows, you know, how you can go from, it's like love conquers all type of theme, but not done in that cheesy way of, you know, Jenya helping David like see the light.
Okay. And I have a follow-up question that's related. Nina and Matthias in the books, because it feels like that theme is very close to what they're trying to do with Nina and Matthias in the books, or in the series. But in the series, I just genuinely don't care about their relationship.
So that is a relationship that happens, but it happens in a different book. Okay. And it's not one. So they have 3 in the Shadow and Bone, the duology and the 6 of Crows, and then there's like something called King of Scars, which I believe is a prequel type of book. I haven't read that one yet, so I don't know for sure, but I do know that Nina and Matthias are a storyline in that book. Okay. So again, they're taking another, like, there's 4 books in one series and they're just like mashing it all together. But Nina isn't a part of the Crows. Okay. And she doesn't make an appearance in either of the 6 of Crows books. So another thing that they just were like, here you go.
that was one of my biggest beefs with season 1 as well, was like, what is the point? Because it felt like such an offshoot storyline that wasn't related to literally anything else that was happening. And then in season 2, I'm like, okay, I guess she's with the crows now, but I still don't understand the whole, like the Peck and Rollins and Matthias stuff in the prison. I was like, what are we doing here?
Yeah,
like,
so
why should I care about this?
If I'm saying this correctly, so the King of Scars book is about the now king's backstory.
Okay.
Nikolai, I think.
Yeah.
His backstory, and then the conflict that happened between Ravka and Fjorden.
Okay.
And so that's when Nina and Matthias kind of come in, and there's like a whole like backstory of how like they've gotten to this point. If I am remembering correctly.
So they're just trying to like keep it chronologically and then mesh. Okay.
Yeah, because Fjorden is the one that starts the conflict in Six of Crows with the drug.
Right.
So they were trying to give more context on to how Ravka and the Grisha are against the Fjordans, because the Fjordans hunt the Grisha and try to kill them because they're against magic wielders. So they're trying to give more context as to like how we got to that point.
Okay. Yeah. Like that makes sense at least. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just the storyline doesn't interest me as much.
Yeah.
As it should. It's not great, honestly.
I don't know what they did. I'm like, what? Just leave him in the prison. Like, why do I care if he's in prison?
I don't need to see him.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the last couple of things. There was some of the casting or overacting in this series was like Wyland looks like he's 11 years old, and it kind of weirds me out that he's like in an adult relationship. The whole thing with Genya when she's like screaming David's name when she's like going down the elevator and he's about to die. I was like, okay, even if you knew he was about, like, even in real life, if this was happening, I don't think you'd be screaming like that. It was so much.
It was a lot.
Like, it feels like Ben Barnes and who's the woman who plays his mother? I can't remember her name. She plays Madame Hooch in Harry Potter as well. But it felt like at times, they're the only like adult actors in the room.
Zoe
Wanamaker. Yes, she was great. Ben Barnes, fantastic.
Yeah.
Jessie Mei Li is pretty good as the lead. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, I feel like the acting can be very hit or miss.
Oh my gosh, yes. I totally agree. It was, and that's why I liked the first season so much, is because I don't think they overacted.
No.
There were like maybe like one or two things towards the end that I was like, oh, it's a little cheesy, but like we'll let it slide. It's okay. Because you know, Shadow and Bone is a young adult series. Right. So it's not really supposed to be like a Lord of the Rings or a Game of Thrones type show. It is a young adult series, but in this season, oh my god, I was like, where did these guys go to acting school? And
it was rough.
The other thing that I had a big problem with was just like the overacting of how they wielded magic. They were like, airplane directing signals and like big emotions, and like their hands were like always in like these places. I was like, this is so unnecessary. Like there are ways to like make, obviously magic wielding isn't like real, but like there's a way to do it to not make it so cheesy. Like they were like like trying to do all these big motions with their hands, and oh my god, it was so unnecessary. And I was like, there's a way to do magic that's not cheesy, and it felt so cheesy and so inauthentic. Like I hated that part.
And it didn't help that the CGI was not fantastic either. Like it, you know, obviously it's a decently budgeted Netflix show, but the CGI was a little rough. And honestly, some of the combat scenes and choreography was a little lame at times.
Yeah.
Like there were some cool parts. Like I feel like the last episode or two, the final battles and whatnot were a little bit better done. But like leading up to that, some of the fight scenes, I was like, what is going on?
What's happening? Yeah. I also found it really funny that they called themselves an army and there was like 8 of them. I was like, wait, where's the army that we're talking about? Like the final battle, like I think that there was more first army, which I was grateful for, because you didn't really see like in the books, the first army is massive. Like there's so many soldiers. And at least there were a little bit more of them towards the end. But like the Grisha army on the Darkling side was like 8 people. Yeah. And I was like, there's supposed to be an army. Like, where is the army?
I'm pretty sure the Spartans in 300 had the same size trench and fit a lot more people.
Yeah, I was like, what is happening here? I mean, there was an epic battle in the books, and it happened at the Little Palace. It didn't happen in whatever weird site that they were at the end of the magical
Lego
ruin.
castle.
Yeah, exactly. So I was also very thrown off by that, because there's supposed to be 2 massive armies on either side of of the line, and they were like 8 people.
That's disappointing.
Yeah.
Any other complaints or concerns that we haven't somehow addressed yet?
Oh my god! The other thing that I didn't really like, and I think you and I talked about this yesterday a little bit too, was just like the difference in like the it just felt like 3 separate complete worlds happening. Like the Crow's storyline felt like Peaky Blinders, and the costuming felt like Peaky Blinders, and then like the Grisha storyline with like their over exaggerated like colored robes, like, and then there's the Shuhan. Like it just felt like there was too many thematic styles trying to happen at once, and I was like, can we just decide on one thing, like and one cohesive like world that we're going with here? And it was just like a melting pot that did not like melt correctly.
Right. It felt like they took different things from like multiverses, like Peaky Blinders, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and we're just gonna throw them all out there.
Yeah.
It literally felt like what I used to play with my Legos, where I just like take some from the Ninja collection and from the Western and like Star Wars, make them fight. Yeah. Like I didn't understand the aesthetic at all.
Yeah, and like the Six of Crows were like trying to like be like these badass, like funny, like there's like an edge of humor to what they're doing, and then like the Grisha side was just like depressed and like brokenhearted, and I'm just like, what? Can we decide on one cohesive thing here? Like to me, how the Thor movies, how they started out so good and they just turned so cheesy at the end. Yeah, like that's how it felt to me. I feel like it went just too far. Like try hard. I felt try hard, and it was not my favorite.
It did feel try hard for the whole series. Final score out of 10 for this season.
Oh man, I feel like I have to do 2 different ones because I know you guys are probably so annoyed because I've been talking about the books the whole time, and there's a lot of people out there who haven't read the books who might look at that and say it was like not bad. So I'm sorry. I know I'm one of those book purist people, but I've always been that way. I love reading books. I'm such a reader. I'm a very big nerd. If I go from the perspective of being a purist and a book lover and then watching the series, like a 4. But if I'm trying to not be biased and not take into account what the books are and just look at it for what it is, like a 6.
Okay. That's as a non-book reader, I gave it a 6 as well. Okay. So this season, I thought the first season was like a 7.5 for me.
Yeah, I would give the first season an 8. Yeah. Because they did such a good job with the first season. And like I said, the first season is why I read the book. So the first season is incredible, and it just,
Yeah, this one went off the rails. And I feel like it's still entertaining because you have that whole love triangle dynamic, and the stuff with Ben Barnes and the lead is pretty good.
Yeah.
All the other stuff. Yeah. I'm just like, we could have kept this to just Sun Summoner stuff, and I probably would have been fine
that was
with
what I was gonna say. Like, if you were gonna ask me how I would fix it, I would have cut out the Six of Crows storyline completely,
right,
and just left it to the Sun Summoner and the Grisha, and just left it at that. And I think maybe then it might have been something that was a little bit more redeemable and like actually worth watching. I mean. Right. I would also tell them all to get an acting coach and to stop doing this every time they wanted to wield magic. But I think it would have been redeemable if they would have just stuck to the Grisha storyline and not try to fabricate an entire storyline from the Six of Crows. So
I think that's fair. So a 6 for me, a 4/6 for you.
We'll average it out to 5.
Yeah, we'll average it out to 5. I think that's fair. I'm interested to read the books now because it does, like I said, it has a lot of interesting concepts. And from what you've said, like the books are just executed way better.
Yes.
So there is something here, just maybe not as much in the Netflix show anymore.
Yeah, I had a bad feeling that this was going to be the direction that was going to go because did you watch the Winx saga at all? Okay, so Netflix also adapted Winx, which was also one of my favorite things as I was a child. It's like a fairy series, and it also just took a dive after the first season, like so dramatically, so terribly. So after I watched that, I was a little bit nervous because I feel like I don't think I've seen a show on Netflix that's been well executed that's fantasy. Maybe The Witcher.
The Witcher's good. I like The Witcher.
Yeah, even I had a tough time. And I know The Witcher's a game, right? It's not a book.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of a hard time even getting into The Witcher because I thought there were some moments that are like, oh, this is so cheesy.
Yeah.
So I was just a little bit nervous in general because I just don't think Netflix has executed like a really good fantasy series, TV series yet. So
yeah, I think you should give The Witcher another chance if you haven't gotten through it. I think it gets better. The first couple episodes, I was like, all right, this is okay. It does get better. I feel like that's kind of the high end fantasy, and this is closer to the low end, which is unfortunate because the first season I felt like they paid attention to the details. But
yeah, well, if you want to read the books, I got them.
yeah,
you can
there
borrow
we go.
them.
Perfect. I think that's going to do it for us here at G Rated. You can follow Mac at Makayla E. Perkins on Twitter. You can follow me at Gerald Bourget. And until next time, keep it G Rated.
Bye.